Good evening or good morning, wherever you are in the world. I'm Tan Xiaochin and I'm moderating the fifth YouTube session of the ninth fall edition of our Read for Pixels campaign. Through Read for Pixels, the Pixel Project is collaborating with 11 award-winning best-selling authors to raise awareness about violence against women and to raise funds for the Pixel Project to keep our efforts to end violence against women alive and kicking. We'll be telling you more about the Read for Pixels fundraiser, which has lots and lots of exclusive author goodies a little later in the session. You can find out more about the Pixel Project by visiting www.thepixelproject.net. Now, we have a very special guest for today's live Read for Pixels discussion and Q&A session, the awesome science fiction author Daniel H. Wilson. Welcome to Read for Pixels, Daniel.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so a little bio. Daniel is a Cherokee citizen and author of the New York Times best-selling novels ROBOPOCALYPSE and its sequel Robogenesis, as well as the Andromeda Evolution, the Clockwork Dynasty, and Amped. He's also the writer of DC Multiverse's Earth 2 Society comic series and the graphic novel Quarantine Zone, as well as non-fiction humor books like How to Build a Robot Army, Where's My Jetpack, and Brojitsu, the martial art of sibling smackdown. He has a PhD in robotics from Carnegie Mellon University, as well as master's degrees in machine learning and robotics. Now, aside from being with us here today, Daniel has also generously donated a couple of awesome goodies to the stash of author goodies we have up as perks for donors at the Read for Pixels Rally Up fundraising page. In fact, the first goodie bundle, Daniel H. Wilson's seriously cool sci-fi bundle, has already been snatched up. So thank you to Steve Shuko. Steve has snagged himself 5 of Daniel's novels, ROBOPOCALYPSE, Robogenesis, Amped, The Clockwork Dynasty, the Andromeda Evolution, his collection of short stories, Guardian Angels and Other Monsters, and some exclusive swag, which are one set of 5 book team bookmarks and one set of 3 book team business cards. Now, all the books in these bundles are first edition paperbacks that Daniel will sign and personalize for Steve. Now, goodie number 2, which is still available for donors worldwide, is the Daniel H. Wilson Writers Meetup, virtual or in person. If you're a novice sci-fi author looking to have a one-to-one with a best-selling sci-fi author to chat about the art and craft of writing, Daniel is offering a 45-minute meeting with one Read for Pixels donor to chat about their work in progress and to share writing advice. The donor may send 7,500 words from their work in progress to Daniel to read ahead of the meeting for discussion purposes. And for the meeting itself, if the donor is located in Portland, Oregon, in the United States, they may choose between a Zoom meeting or an in-person meeting with Daniel to chat over coffee. Now, if the donor is located outside of Portland, Oregon, then the meeting will take place over Zoom. There is only one of this opportunity available, and it is a rare chance for any sci-fi writer working on getting their first book published to get expert guidance from one of today's foremost sci-fi authors. And if you have robots or AI in your story in any shape or form, Daniel is definitely the writer you want to talk to. Now, this meeting is available on a first-come, first-served basis, so go and donate now to snag it before someone else does. We've raised $1,735 towards our $5,000 goal so far, so please help us to keep the momentum going before the fundraiser ends in October. All funds go towards the Pixel Project's work to help end violence against women. If you're watching this session live on YouTube, you will also be able to ask Daniel questions right now. Just make sure you're logged into your YouTube account so that you can type your questions into the chat box to the right of the YouTube screen, and Regina, who is today's producer and chat box moderator, will relay them to me to read out to Daniel to answer. And now over to Daniel. What will you be reading for us today?
Today I'm going to read a chapter of The Clockwork Dynasty. This is, the novel I wrote before my last novel, and it's pretty much science fiction fantasy. Sort of the high concept is that we're following sort of a future where we realize there are these automatons that have existed for ages, and they're finally starting to run out of power, and they're starting to cannibalize each other. So it's a little bit of Highlander, a little Terminator, a lot of really fun stuff. And also I just get to really dive into history. So the novel takes place all throughout history, all different ages, as these sort of immortal robots, these automatons, have survived for ages. And so I'm going to read a chapter. You know, what's interesting about, I think, these characters is the ones that are called automats or automatons, they look like people, but they're not actually people. So, but they're judged, based on their embodiment. And so this is a chapter that's an exchange between a machine called Peter, who is modeled after Peter the Great. He's a huge, masculine, sort of like a protector, like a fighter. Each of these machines has sort of an anima. It has a sort of a heart, a word that it is designed to embody. And so they're really sort of built as sort of like you build a statue to commemorate like an event that occurred or something that you want to celebrate about humanity. And they're sort of like living statues that have lived for ages after ages, and they serve their words. And his word is pravda, so he serves truth and justice. And the other person in this scene is named Elena, and she's embodied as a little girl. And so she's been a little girl for a really, really long time. And her word is logic, and that's the word that she serves. And so Peter has been protecting Elena for centuries, and she's tired of it. And so this is kind of the moment when they finally have to sort of, when she finally kind of stands up and decides that she's going to do this on her own and that she doesn't need him anymore. And so
Okay.
I will
Yeah.
now just read the book. Yeah. So, all right. London, 1758. Elena follows me outside to the alley beside the brothel, closing the door behind her. It's raining now, the clammy air heavy with smoke from the burned ship. The commotion on the river has thankfully drawn attention away from here. I step to the humped center of the narrow, deserted street, standing on the precipice of a jagged channel that runs down the middle. My sister, Elena, is holding a bundle of yellow silk in her hands. The lines of her body are lost in a dark riding coat, too big for her, turning her into a shadow beneath the crimson lamp. Above us, small faces peek through one of the few dimly lit windows of the brothel. Girls locked inside an abattoir. We slaughtered every man in the building, and yet Elena did not free the children. What are you doing? I ask her. They're little girls. Elena steps out into the rain. Circumstances have changed, Peter, she says. I need to regroup, find a place where I can blend in. A girls' school will provide me with both opportunities. You know that I'm a quick thinker, and this is the best idea I've got. This is insane, I say to her. Come with me back to the estate. Elena pulls back her hood, a dark mass of curls spilling out. Her eyes are wide and searching, lips trembling as she asks, what happened to Hypatia? Gone, you saw. Yes, but her anima? Lai Shu kept it, I say, to add to her collection. And what of Hypatia's vessel? Sunk to the bottom of the Thames. Darling, please, we could find her. Come with me now, Elena. Hands curled into tiny fists, the girl stands in the middle of the broken street and throws her head back. Tensing her whole body, she screams, channeling the piercing shout into the rain-filled sky with inhuman force. The scream lasts for a long time. Come, I say, extending a hand, please. The rain is driving now, lamps guttering, drops sliding in watery veins across the leather of my face and backs of my hands. Beads of the misty rain perch like pearls in Elena's hair. Each drop is washing away part of the horror of what just happened, but not enough. The puddles around me are dark as blood. She was my only friend, says Elena, and she is gone because of you, because you refused your duty. I chose you, I say. You were not made to serve me, says Elena. Her voice has gone flat and emotionless in a way that I find frightening. We each serve our word, Peter. Being true to that is the only path to happiness. She drops the silken bundle onto muddy stone. The yellow handkerchief and its precious contents lie in filth, soaking wet and stained with soot. There's your destiny, she says, nodding. There's who you were meant to protect, your old master. Elena, no, I say, but I can't take my eyes away from the handkerchief. A rivulet of rainwater tugs a corner of fabric away to reveal the anima. The glittering crescent of metal calls to me. To hold it in my hands would feel right. You. I promise to protect you. No, my dear Peter, Elena urges. There's no magic in our origin. We were simply repaired at the same time by a foolish old man who served an ambitious Tsar. That does not make us brother and sister. I remember a grassy clearing atop a broad plateau at dusk, A little girl lighting a candle placed within a paper sky lantern, her smile lit from below. As the first stars hardened in the sky, my sister and I added our own constellations to the cosmos. I don't believe that, I say. Elena plants both hands on my thighs, pushing me back. Her clockwork voice echoes sharply in the empty alley, under the thrum of rain. I am not your master. I am not your sister. I'm not anything to you. I blink, stumbling back. It should destroy me, what she said. But I feel only pinpricks of rain on my skin. Each needle bite is building into a crescendo of realization. I will always be alone. I was always alone. Could the feelings I have for Elena be an illusion? Do they exist in a false world, constructed by a blank, newborn, clockwork mind? Have I made meaning out of coincidence? She said, we're nothing to each other. Elena slowly draws a stiletto. Take the anima and go, she says, threatening. Elena. Without hesitation, she steps forward and slides the blade into my chest. I catch her slight body in both my hands and lift her and hug her to me. My chest shudders at the bite of steel, but I'm breathing in the scent of her hair and perfume, squeezing my eyes closed. For this 1 second, I can pretend things are simple again, perfect and safe, like when we were in the lab, before Elena studied the world, before she, twisting out of my grasp, she drives the blade deeper. The steel separates my ribs and punctures the bellow of my lungs, my breath dying in my throat. Elena steps back and watches me as I crumple to my knees on rough cobblestones. Elena grabs the cloth of my jacket and pulls me close to her. Go, she says, her lips an inch from my ear. Leave me to my studies. Protect the anima of your old master and serve your word. I'm mute, the world spinning away from me, and Elena along with it. Do your duty. In a haze of water and pain, knees soaking wet, shoulders hunched, I wrap my arms tight around my own punctured torso. My voice is stalled, diaphragm contracting as my final breath escapes. The silken bundle lies on the road before me. If you return, says Elena, pulling her hood back over her face, I will kill you. The harsh words are spoken in a child's musical voice. Where once her face seemed impish, now her features are hard and unforgiving. Her soft cheeks are beaded with rain, but her eyes are blank. It is a mask, and I do not truly know the person who hides beneath it. Perhaps I never did. With shaking hands, I pick up the anima and cradle it to my chest. Some mechanism fails inside me, and I pitch forward onto my elbows, forehead pressing against the cold stone. Now that I'm not breathing, the world has become quiet, and the steady drumming of rain grown to havoc in my ears. When I lift my eyes, Elena is walking away. For an instant, she's a little girl again, hopping between puddles. Her face is lost under the black velvet riding cloak. Her buckled shoes click over cobblestones that dance and shine under the lamplight and stars and falling rain. I try to call her name, but nothing comes out.
Thank you for that lovely reading, Daniel. Your books definitely feature interesting female protagonists like Matilda Perez from the ROBOPOCALYPSE series, and June Stefanoff and Elena Profnova from the Clockwork Dynasty, which we heard just now, and who are compelling and very human characters with agency. And you have also written stories featuring world-famous comic book characters like Lois Lane, Power Girl, and Huntress in your Earth 2 Society comics. So what or who are your inspirations for the female characters that you created?
Well, I think obviously the people I've known and the people I interact with are, featured heavily. But, my wife is a scientist. I used to be a scientist. And so she's kind of got this parallel life that I sometimes kind of wish maybe I was still leading. So she definitely, she's pretty much the foremost voice of reason in all my work. She reads it and tells me when I'm being an idiot, basically. But I think that scientific mindset serves me well just in terms of writing characters, because I tend to not be as concerned about sort of the externalities. I'm more interested in what are the motivations of this character, how are they set up, what do they want to get, what's stopping them from getting it. And sometimes gender plays a huge part in that. Sometimes culture does. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes all of those things combined play a huge role in that. But primarily, I'm interested in building a character that's meant to do something, in the story. And so, so that's kind of how that goes. For instance, I did the Andromeda Evolution, which was a sequel to the Andromeda Strain, and it was super fun. Yeah, it was just written by Michael Crichton. So I worked with Crichton's son, the estate of Michael Crichton, who passed away in 2008. And I was really, I wanted to build a story that was going to be kind of like in that same world, right? And playing in Crichton's sort of sandbox, but obviously modernized, because the Andromeda Strain came out, in the 60s. And so to look at the Andromeda Strain and see, they put together a crack squad of scientists, right? And they go out and they solve the problem. And, except for one exception, they're all men. And, that's how that was then. And then to look at it now, I had so much fun building that team that go out and go on this crazy adventure. And of course, I think they're predominantly women, because that was my experience in science, and it's my experience now. And so that's just me accurately reflecting, the world as I know it. And really, that was for me the most fun, because I got to draw on all the people I've gone to school with, all the scientists I admire, all the people I studied under, who happen to be women. So putting together those characters was just so much fun. And really, that's kind of my mindset whenever I build these characters. It's character first.
All right. Yeah, let's delve in a bit deeper into that. So all genres have their share of female stereotypes and tropes. And in addition, many of your female characters are diverse in heritage. For example, Mathilda is Latina, Chera Rich from the same series is Native American, and Dr. Nidhi Vedala and Dr. Pin Wu from the Andromeda Evolution are Indian and Chinese respectively. So it's not a stretch to deduce that the risk of stereotyping is doubled when gender and race intersect. So how do you break stereotypes to create female characters with agency while dealing with the world around them, including situations that involve sexism, misogyny, and violence against women and girls?
Sure. Look, you can never, as an author, embody the experiences of everything that you're writing about, so. And what I found really early on was I was a robotics expert. I had this PhD, I had finished school, and right in that moment, I was at my apex. And of course, that's when I decided not to build robots and to start. But I wrote ROBOPOCALYPSE, for instance, and you would think that as a robotics expert, I wouldn't have to do any research, right? I already know all this stuff. But I think that when you actually have that depth of experience in one area, you realize how much you don't know. And also, ideally, you have access to people that you can ask. And so for me, this first played out in the area of robotics. So doing research on accurately portraying robotics. But it goes to all the research that you do in a book. So it goes to culture, it goes to gender. So, so Shara, that character, that's named after a girl I went to high school with in Oklahoma. She's Cherokee. I'm Cherokee. You'd think that I would know a lot about that, and that I would be able just to write that, But no, having been from a place where there are so many different tribes and they're interacting in so many different ways, and there's so many different Native people that are doing so many different things. I knew this is stuff where I know how much I don't know, and I need to dive in and consult people and have them read it. One big advantage of having gone to grad school was I did meet people from all over the world. Yeah. And also, whenever you're doing science, you are never afraid to ask questions. You can. This is one of the great things about academia is you can just knock on a door. And guess what? If that person is an expert at the thing you're going to ask them about, they 9 times out of 10 are really excited to talk to you because that's the thing they do, right?
Yeah.
So for me, with that, I had access to a lot of different experts, and I had access to people from all over the world. So I was thrown into the sort of pressure cooker of grad school with Russians, Bulgarians, anywhere in Asia, anywhere, people were from everywhere. Oklahoma, we were represented. I think, actually the only native person in the Robotics Institute, but like I had access to all of these people. I had the mindset of just asking and delving into it and really getting people and listening to them and not thinking that I knew too much just because I was sort of had a background or had been exposed to something. And so, yeah, I mean, it's a simple answer. You have to do your research and you have to show it to people that are representative. And then and also I think you need to lean into what your own background is and own that, obviously. But I mean, that's the stuff that you got to nail, right? Because the robotics guy can't get the robots wrong. The native guy can't get the Oklahoma wrong. So that's the area where sometimes you have to work hardest, is the stuff that you think you do know.
Yeah. Okay. So speaking of that, do you find it easier to subvert or avoid female stereotypes through writing your own characters versus writing stories set in established story verses like DC's Earth 2? Or are there different challenges for each situation?
Oh, definitely different challenges. So, look, the way that I have a kind of a logical way of thinking, typically. But the way I kind of think about all the different media that I've written across. So I've written, novels, I've written nonfiction, journalism, and then it goes all the way, to screenplays, comic books, graphic novels. But the one sort of variable that I really use to graph all those is collaboration. So you have novels way over here, and it's you and your editor, and maybe your literary agent if they're really sweet and kind and agree to read a draft. And that's it, right? And there's not a lot of collaboration that's necessarily happening. And then you go all the way over, and somewhere in the middle are comic books. And especially if you're playing in an established IP, you've got to obey. First of all, you've got to sort of stick to, what makes sense in that world and what makes that world work and what people want from it. But also, every new media has its own set of sort of traps to walk into, tropes, boring things, shortcuts, and a lot of them end up being at the best, they're just boring or trite. It's like stuff you've seen 1,000 times. It's just a shortcut, and you've got to make sure you don't walk into it and just fall into that. And in the worst case, it can be really sexy. You think of comics have not had the best track record for years. And in fact, I had a situation where, so I was on our comics team. I was writing for a while with Mike Johnson and Marguerite Bennett. So we had a female voice in the room, and we accidentally, in some issue, had a character whose storyline was progressed by him being motivated to get revenge on his wife being killed. And this is the first time I had heard of being fridged, right? Because I was new to the comic book world. I wasn't aware of sort of that pitfall, just kind of waiting for me. I stepped right into it and learned from it. But then, so you really need, I mean, there are really common pitfalls to fall into, but they're different across media. And I think that when you do step into established IP, and you always need to bring your own perspective, and you always need to, if you see a wrong, write it. You certainly can do that. I think without if you're operating in an IP where if you remove sexism, you break the IP. That's the wrong IP. It's like it's kind of like you think about great 80s movies that you can no longer, they're just irredeemable. Revenge of the Nerds, God, I remember loving Revenge of the Nerds, and now I look at it and I'm like, no, don't reboot it. I just don't see the way through, right? Let that one, go softly into that good night.
And jump.
It's the wrong IP.
Yeah. And jumping off a bit about what you said about falling into that fridging trap, right? So as we can see from the hashtag men writing women, many male authors can't seem to write female characters well. And even best-selling male authors like Brandon Sanderson have talked about how they initially found it difficult to write women well, and it took a lot of work to finally write compelling and complex female characters. So as a male author yourself, did you find it difficult to write women when you first started writing?
I don't. Well, so my kind of evolution into writing
Mm,
started with. I mean, I love short stories, and I will
mm,
tell you, like all the short stories, not all of them, a lot of the short stories I came up on were just the masters, and they were all white guys, right? So
mm,
I
mm.
read a whole lot. You think about like that's what my hopper was like filled up with, my data banks,
Yeah.
and then you go out and you start writing, and so so first of all, I feel like being able to break that, so that future writers have a more diverse sort of
Mm,
data set, training
yeah.
data, not to make myself an AI here, but like, but that's where I was coming into it, and so yeah. Sorry, I'm losing track of the question. I got myself off into it. Can you repeat the?
Yeah. Did you find it difficult to write women when you first
Oh
started writing?
yeah. So when I started writing ROBOPOCALYPSE, I wrote essentially I didn't go into people's heads. Like I would describe
Mm,
a movie I was watching in my head, and it's like it's funny to go back and read that because to me, like just me personally, my experience when I'm writing and I'm just describing everything from the outside, it's a
mm,
lot easier to just sort of describe that and to not have to really, really feel what's this character thinking, and
okay.
like what exactly. And so I feel like RoboPocalypse is a little bit like it's so much action, it's so much. People are showing who they are through their action. I'm not
Mm,
like luxuriating in their thoughts. They're not like
mm.
daydreaming. Shit is real. They're all, they're getting killed.
Yeah.
So that was a little bit like my Training Wheels novel, right? And then this, Clockwork Dynasty was really a novel where it was my fourth novel, and I was
Mm,
finally able to sink into my character and get into their heads. And I think that would, as I wrote more and got more used to it, that became, I would say, that's the aspect of writing any character where you realize, okay, what is this character thinking? And I really need to get out of my own body and my own mind and write
mm.
this character from utterly from their perspective. And oddly enough, and this is so dumb, this is such robot stuff, I swear, but as a roboticist,
Yes.
you have to build machines that are going to do stuff that humans can do.
Yes.
And the stuff that feels easiest to a human is often the
Mm.
hardest for a robot. And that's because the
Ah.
stuff that's easiest for us to do is the stuff that we're highly evolved to do. We got a lot of machinery that's dedicated to recognizing faces or
Mm,
recognizing speech or generating speech. And so writing robot characters from the beginning, I would
mm,
always just break it down to nothing. Like, okay, what does it mean for a human to move the meat on their face, or to bare their teeth at you? Are they smiling or they're not? And so this notion of stripping away even just even me as an author, okay, Daniel, you're not even human anymore, right? You're just this entity that's looking at these meat bags and like trying to figure out what's happening. I mean, I feel like that was a really good exercise for me because then you realize, okay, you have to go back to this state and then step into these characters, and leave yourself out of it. And honestly,
mm,
if your database is filled up with sexist stuff that you've read and your life is, then people are gonna have blind spots, and that's why you never, never, never publish anything or put anything out there without all the people you trust reading it first. There's my
wife?
echo. my wife is making an announcement over the echo, so
Oops.
sorry about
Okay.
that.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, and that ties in nicely to my next question actually. So, in your recent Ask Me Anything on Reddit Fantasy for River Pixels, you mentioned that as part of your writing process, you actually quote, "Give myself the Bechdel test and scour through trope websites, praying that I'm not being totally derivative." And stop quote. So why do you think many authors still have trouble writing stories that pass the Bechdel test, despite the fact that there are many more things that women talk about other than men?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, so the Bechdel test, if you're giving that to yourself, it's already, you're in trouble, right? I mean, for me, that's just like, you should have already, you shouldn't look at that very last, right? But for me, it's a sanity check. It's like, okay, right? Yeah, okay, the seal of freshness, like, yeah, you ship that product. I think it's just not being able to get out of your own head. I mean, again, I write characters preliminary, like from the beginning up, based on character, like their motivation, who they love, what they love, why would they do this? Does it all make sense? Like, we're going to throw this person into this crazy situation. What would they do? And so, some of those characters are going to be female, right? Like some of them are going to be male. And, I don't feel like I need to prescriptively give them all the Bechdel test every scene or something like that. It should work itself out, right? Like if the reverse Bechdel test should work too, right? What was I hearing the other day? I was joking with a friend about the Bechdel test. Do you have two robots that talk about something besides a human? And I believe in the Bechdel test because I'm so sick of robots being overly concerned with human beings. Forget about it. You're robots. You're awesome. You don't need to pay too much attention to people. So anyway, there's that too, right? A whole array of tests that they have to go through. But I would say the reason that's hard is probably just because you're not stepping out of yourself, the way that you need to. And also possibly, you're thinking of the character as female first and then everything is downstream from that. Like I've had friends ask me, so how do you write like a native character? And I'm like, you just write a character that is motivated by normal human things. And we are all people, right? Like on some level. So unless like shit totally hinges on like the fact that she's female, the fact that she's native, like maybe that's not something you should be focusing on. Maybe you should just focus on building a really believable character. Because I think that takes you 90% of the way there.
Yeah. And I mean, you have written a wide range of male characters, ranging from photojournalist turned soldier Cormac Wallace and machine repairman Takeo Nomura in the ROBOPOCALYPSE series, to Aftermath or Robot Peter Alexovich in the Clockwork Dynasty, as well as long-running comic book characters like Jay Garrick, Dick Grayson, and Jimmy Olsen. Do you think reframing how stories describe men away from hostile and toxic stereotypes and towards complexity and even vulnerability can be one of the ways speculative fiction writers can break away from harmful tropes that promote toxic masculinity and the dehumanization of women?
Yeah. I mean, look, at the end of the day, toxic masculinity, dehumanization of women, I mean, those are terrible things. But the thing that's one step before that that's also terrible is it's boring. It's boring to read. You've seen it a million times. You're creating a product that's going to be consumed. It should be entertaining, right? So you think of like Cormac McCarthy or Cormac Wallace. Sorry. Cormac Wallace ends up kind of being the hero of ROBOPOCALYPSE. He's like a white guy. His older brother is the soldier, the badass, the guy, and like there's a whole
stereotype. Yeah.
He's kind of that guy who you'd expect to be the guy. And instead he gets killed. And Cormac is the one who just happens to be standing there and has to step up and solve, Takeo Nomura, one of my favorite characters ever. And by the way, I gotta get back around on the trilogy. I'm still waiting on. I have a lot of excuses, but Takeo Nomura is one of my favorite characters ever because he's a person who's built 100% on compassion, and that's his superpower. Is he has compassion for all things, including machines, and this is why he ends up surviving and saving so many people. And it's not a masculine or feminine thing. It's just it's certainly not a stereotypical sort of attribute, right? I find that when you're writing anything that you've seen a lot, it's just going to be boring. And so why not subvert it? Like at you think, and this, maybe some people are like, ROBOPOCALYPSE, it's like a robot uprising book. Gee, don't you think we've seen that like 1,000 times? But even ROBOPOCALYPSE is subverting that message. I mean, if you read that novel and you get to the end and you think about it, and then if you read the sequel, you realize that that was not what you just witnessed was not it was not robots trying to end humanity. It was robots trying.
It's not what you think it is.
Yeah, it's not what you think it is necessarily. And honestly, as a writer, you have to already know what the audience expectations are going to be. So like for me, I deal a lot with robots. So robots are evil, right? Always. If you introduce a robot, the audience goes, that's an evil robot. That robot's going to freak out and start killing people. I know it. And so like, I know that you're thinking that. And so I use it as like a red, cape in front of a bull, right? I'm like, okay, come on, audience. Like, we're going to subvert that expectation. We're going to make you fall in love with this robot. Like, or, we're going to, yeah, I mean, but playing with those expectations is part of your job as a writer. And just to conform to those expectations, I mean, like maybe write another draft or two, right? Get a better book, because conforming to those things is not only harmful, but it just doesn't result in a good book usually.
Yeah. I mean, okay, so do you think that eventually the violent alpha male type character will phase out of speculative fiction as cultures worldwide start kicking out toxic masculinity? Or do you think it's one of those stereotypes that are going to stick around for much longer than expected?
Well, look, I mean, we're always going to have the square jaw, right? The hero, and I think that those heroic traits are reflections of what's going on in society. Like, what do we value right now? What are heroic traits? And so there's something, if you look back at an extremely sexist society, those guys are the heroes. They're lauded, right? They star in all the movies and all the books. Flash, whoa. He's out there using a football moves to kill space robots. But but it's such a great theme song. But but I think as those sort of mores change in our society, we're going to start to, we already have, and we will continue to see heroes that are representing traits and attributes that we value as readers, right? Yeah. I mean, I don't think, I don't know, maybe I'm just not reading the stuff with the toxic jerks, but I mean, I've read so much great stuff lately that is, don't ask me to name it all, by the way, because I have no memory for that. And then I'll have to turn around and go to all my books and I'll crawl around on my hands and knees and find the titles and everything. And God forbid, and the authors' names too. But I feel like they're representing stuff more like empathy and compassion, and like these are superpowers. You can kick a lot of ass with these different attributes. It doesn't have to just be raw aggression and strength. Yeah. And I've seen a lot of those characters, they've been shifted over into the villain category, right? Like, and in fact, they even make boring villains, so I'm thinking kind of a little bit of like some of the Star Wars movies where it's like the bad guys are just, domination and control. Yeah. And it's like, really? I don't know. Like, it seems simple, right? Right? We get more complex. Yeah. Maybe something else going on. And I love that audiences are way more like complex in what they expect now too, right? Yeah. It's not enough just to be, he's very brave. Well, it's like, why? What happened? Why did this person step up and that person didn't? So anyway, I think that complexity is good for all media and stories. And I just, it would be tough to get a toxic male hero going. And basically, like we've been saying, stories are one of the most powerful ways of bringing about social change. And now, the line between consent and coercion isn't always very clear in science fiction books, and certainly in some earlier science fiction titles and some of those that explore human-alien or human-robot relationships, the consent isn't always there or explicit when it comes to sex. Do you think that this is an issue that writers in the genre have started tackling successfully in recent years? And I do remember that you have a human-robot relationship in ROBOPOCALYPSE. Yeah, but that was never, Takeo was never, that was an emotional relationship, just for the record. I firmly believe science fiction authors should never write sex scenes.
Oh,
um,
okay.
no, I'm just kidding. I think that probably went for. I'm thinking of some Martha Wells. I'm thinking of Annalee Newitz.
Mm,
They've done good work with
mm,
like the robot human relationships and really exploring that. But I mean, look, I think that as long as you are exploring it, I mean, maybe there's a scene where someone doesn't give consent, but as long as you're actually aware that that's not that that's something that you're saying and that's something that you're exploring in that scene,
mm,
then I think that we see all sorts of shocking, horrible stuff happen in books, and
right.
so. But I mean, I think the trick is just to be aware of it, right? And
Mm,
again, like especially, I mean, you think about sex as being, I mean, that's the scene where you've got um, powerful stuff happening, and you need to definitely do your research and talk to the people that
mm.
are knowledgeable about whatever type of interaction is occurring, right?
Yeah.
Because I mean, unless you're into everything, and
Mm,
unless you're Dan Savage, could maybe the columnist,
mm,
that guy might be able to sort of, and then again, probably not. No, he couldn't. So, um, yeah, again, I think it's about researching it all, and I mean, and also knowing when you're on thin ice, right? Like that's
yeah.
definitely always been known as a thin ice sort of area for science
Mm,
fiction. I don't know why we're so bad at it historically. I personally stay away from it
mm.
because it's not what interests me in terms of
Sex doesn't interest
writing.
you? Okay, wait.
Oh no,
Sorry,
I'm
that might not be
interested.
PG.
It's not what interests me to write, and also I can just already imagine the eyebrow arch on my wife,
Yeah.
just how high it would go if
Mm.
I ever decided to throw in a real gutsy scene. So.
Okay, so let's see. So do your research, be aware of what you're writing about. And other than these two, do you have any other suggestions for science fiction authors who wish to include violence against women in their books?
Oh man, I mean, no, just be aware of what you're. I mean, it goes for all the things that you're writing. Just
Mm,
be aware. And you know, I think there's one thing that a lot of new authors that I talk to. One thing I try to impress on them is
mm,
that, and this is really important, I think, for what we're talking about right now. If you are going to explore stuff like that, there is the story that you wrote, and then there's the story of why you wrote it.
yeah.
And both of those stories are really, really important. And I kind of think of them as, I'm being a super logical dork starting out. I always thought, well, I wrote this book. It should
Mm,
be judged on what it is. And
mm,
it shouldn't matter who wrote it or what. They should just,
mm,
whatever. It's like the eyeballs are compiling the code. You read the book, you
mm,
compile it into a story. But no, that is not how human beings work. That is not how
mhm.
media works.
Yeah.
Is just not how it works. And so the story of why you wrote it is super important. And if you have a great story there,
Mm,
if you've experienced this stuff, if this is your goal, then I think that sort of lays down where it's most fruitful to go in the actual story that you wrote, right? So if you
mm,
don't have a dog in that fight, or you don't know up from down, just stay away from it. You don't have anything to say about it, then you should probably
yeah.
stay away from it. But if that story of behind the story is why you're writing, then I think every author should definitely go and explore that stuff that they feel like they need to express their
Mm.
truth.
Okay. All right. And we'll do a bit of a pivot now. As mentioned earlier, you, Daniel, are Native American, specifically Cherokee. Now, over the past 5 years, the extremely high rates of murdered and missing Indigenous women is finally getting some, though still not nearly enough mainstream attention from society. Native and Indigenous women also experience extremely high rates of sexual violence. And let me get a screen up here. Oops, sorry, not the perfect one. Ah, there we go. Okay, so Let me just read it out. In the United States, Native American and Alaska Native women are more than 2.5 times more likely to be raped or sexually assaulted than other women in the country, according to the United Nations. In Canada, Native Indigenous women make up 4% of the population, but 16% of all women murdered are Indigenous. This is from the Indigenous and Native Affairs Department of the Government of Canada. And in a 2018 survey of 148 Native American women living in Seattle, Washington, in the United States, 94% reported being raped or coerced into sex. 82% who were raped or coerced into sex reported that the incident happened before they were 18 years old. And only 8% of cases of a rape or coercion victim's first attack ended in a conviction. And for those of you guys, for those of you all who, need resources for help. So in the United States, you can go to the Native Indigenous Women's Resource Center or the Strong Hearts Native Helpline 1-84447-NATIVE. In Canada, then you can check out the Native Women's Association of Canada, and for North America in general, the MMIW, which stands for Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women database at the Sovereign Bodies Institute. So my question for you, Daniel, is what do you think authors and other pop culture influencers can do to contribute to the collective efforts to further raise awareness and trigger action to address this issue by the wider community and the countries and nations where this is happening?
Well, sure, stuff like this, right? If you can use your voice to get out there and just bring attention to this stuff, then that's what you should do. Sorry, it's very dry here.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Oh dear.
That's always fun. That's a new one, huh?
Yeah, new one for us too.
Yeah. So yeah, any chance you get, and also just, I think it's great that there's more and more resources available, and that you have something to point to, right? And again, that story behind the story of why you're writing, make sure that you tell that story, and you're able to make people understand why reading your story is important.
Okay, and from there we're going to jump onto something a bit different. We're going to let's talk about geek culture. So geek culture in general, including science fiction and fantasy, has had its share of critics saying that it's still oh dear.
I'm just gonna get sorry.
Yeah, poor Daniel's getting a bit of a.
Yeah, I've got. Okay.
You're right.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Let's continue, please.
Okay, so I'm just going to repeat the question, and I'll put you back on the screen. So geek culture in general, including science fiction and fantasy, has had its share of critics saying that it is still too male-dominated, despite a rising number of prominent, well-respected, and well-known female authors. Plus, there is still plenty of hostile, misogynistic, and sexist behavior by male geeks towards female geeks. What do you think needs to be done to make geek culture as a whole, whether it's comics or gaming or books, more welcoming for women and girls?
I think just having people speak up, so that sorry, I feel ridiculous. Let me.
It's all right. We've just got a couple more questions to go.
Okay. Just making sure everybody is able to speak up, because I feel like a lot of that kind of stuff happens when people think there are no repercussions, or they think they somehow own a space, and when people speak up and you realize, oh wait, maybe everybody's not going to laugh if I say this awful thing. Then people start to realize, hey, this is not just me that's here. This is a lot of other people, and so I don't know. I just more representation in all the art that's coming out, and being able to give, let people have voices, and celebrate the stuff that they like, and realize that, hey, this is more than just us that are in here.
Okay, and Now, parents are usually the most influential role models in a person's life. As a father yourself, what do you think parents can do to help prevent violence against women and girls in future generations and to get boys involved in helping to do so?
Yeah, well, so my son is very lucky that he's got two sisters, and so he knows like exactly what it's like to be around women and to cooperate with them and to make compromises and for everybody to
Yeah.
have to get along. He's a middle child, so
Mm,
he's a big brother. He knows to protect his little sister, and then he takes advice from his older sister, and so he's lucky. I had a brother. As a kid, I had my mom in the house, but I didn't have sisters. I wasn't around women as much. And so,
mm,
I mean, and then of course, there's that toxic masculinity thing, that kids deal with. Um,
mm,
I love these outlets that kids have in terms of like how D&D is coming back, and there's all
yeah.
this, and just reading books, and there's just celebrating sort of that stuff,
Mm,
celebrating, being intellectual, like having passions, wanting to dress up. I was literally the reason I have a nosebleed is I was at the Renaissance Fair all day in super
okay.
dry central deserty Oregon,
Mm,
and like it's so fun to go there and just see people in their safe space, see families just like dressing up, being goofy.
yeah.
There's no like I don't know, people are just free to be passionate about stuff. And so in our house we just make sure that well, first of all, number one, modeling, right? The
Yeah.
way my wife is actually a child psychologist,
Oh.
so yeah, so it's her. She knows what she's talking about, right? So
Mm,
I'm like just a sort of a henchman, in a lot, in a lot of what goes on, but just modeling a good relationship between us, and a lot of it is sort of, I've taken my son aside and said, hey, look, like men typically will be bigger. Think about it
mm,
from this other perspective. If someone's bigger than you and they talk like that and they're right there, like that's going to make you, that's going to be scary, right? Or that's going to make you worried. But also talking to my daughters and saying, hey, like if someone's not listening to you, you need to speak up. Like you need to
mm,
say, like, or you should feel comfortable saying, hey, no, I wasn't finished. And
yeah.
everybody, I love the sibling dynamic because everybody's got all this time to practice,
Mm.
as kids and make their mistakes as kids. And then hopefully, they'll go out into the world better adjusted than I was with just my brother, and like, a whole lot of dirt bikes and, all of that stuff. So yeah, I mean, it starts with modeling, and I think that as situations arise, we can step in
Mm.
and we can process it with the kids and talk about it. So that's what we try to do.
Okay, that's great. And so, final question, which is a two-parter. You have been so very incredibly supportive of our Read for Pixels campaign and our anti-violence against women work as a whole. Um, a bit of an obvious one, but why do you support the cause to end violence against women?
Yeah, I mean, because I have an opportunity to do this. It's an honor, and it's thrilling to be able uh, to use my voice to help amplify this if any way that I can, if I can. So,
Mm,
obviously, violence against women is wrong, and as people that are creating media that goes out there and stories that are invoked in people's heads, it's important to start there. The stories we tell in our culture, reflect our values, and so I think it's great to have people that are creating, movies, books, TV, everything
mm.
out there. Just be aware of this and be able to contribute their voice to the cause if they can. So, it's an honor.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Well, you basically answered the second part, which is what do you think authors can do to help with the cultural change needed to eradicate violence against women and girls?
Yeah, absolutely. I
Mm,
mean, again, just being
mm,
aware, and then if you have that story behind a story,
mm.
that's your voice, and tell that story.
Lovely. Okay, putting myself back on. And thank you, Daniel, for that excellent session and for powering through with the most.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, and thank you to everyone for tuning in. Just to recap, aside from hanging out with us here today, Daniel has also generously donated a couple of awesome bundles to the stash of order goodies we have up as books for donors at the Read for Pixels Rally Up fundraising page. Goodie number one, which is Daniel H. Wilson's Seriously Cool Sci-Fi Bundle, consisting of 6 of his books and some exclusive swag, has already been snatched up by one generous donor. Thank you, Steve Shukau. Goodie number two, which is still available to donors worldwide, is the Daniel H. Wilson Writers Meetup, virtual or in person. If you're a novice sci-fi author looking to have a one-to-one with a best-selling sci-fi author to chat about the art and craft of writing, Daniel is offering a 45-minute meeting with one Read for Pixels donor to chat about their work in progress and to share writing advice. The donor may send 7,500 words from their work in progress to Daniel to read ahead of the meeting for discussion purposes. And for the meeting, if the donor is located in Portland, Oregon in the United States, they may choose between a Zoom meeting or an in-person meeting to chat over coffee. If the donor is located outside Portland, Oregon, then the meeting will take place over Zoom. There is only one of this opportunity available, and it is a rare chance for any sci-fi writer working on getting their first book published to get expert guidance from one of today's foremost sci-fi authors. And it's a particularly great opportunity if you're writing or are interested in robots or artificial intelligence, as Daniel not only has experience writing about robots and AI, but also holds PhDs in the subject. Now, this meeting is available on a first-come, first-served basis, so go quickly and donate to snag this goodie before someone else does. There are also plenty more goodies available from authors like Romina Garber, Kwame Mabala, Namina Forna, Jeffrey Kennedy, Sue Ann Jeffren, Sujata Messi, Eugene Bacon, and Charlie N. Holmberg, as well as publishers like Tor Books UK and Random House Children's Books and more. New goodies will be released every week throughout September, so do continue to drop by our Rally Up webpage. We have raised $1,735 towards our $5,000 goal so far, so please help us to keep the momentum going before the fundraiser ends in October. All funds go towards the Pixel Project's work to help end violence against women. And here is where you can go. To get the goodies, you can donate on Rally Up at tinyurl.com/r4p Rally Up 2022. Be careful, it's case sensitive. And if you want to learn more about Read for Pixels, including our past and upcoming author sessions, you can go to bit.ly/readforpixels. Now, okay. So, the Pixel Project has also produced its very first charity anthology, Giving the Devil His Due, last year. The classic edition of this The Twilight Zone Meets Promising Young Women collection of stories is now available in both paperback and ebook formats, with the audiobook edition coming out soon. Additionally, we have teamed up with 12 of the 16 authors to offer an exclusive limited edition anthology bookplate for buyers. Each author will sign 16 bookplates and it'll be first come, first serve. Each bookplate includes a resource for domestic violence and sexual assault victims and survivors in 205 countries. For more information about the anthology and how to score a bookplate, visit bit.ly/Giving the Devil His Due. For those of you who are interested in getting your very own copy of the anthology, you can order it from major booksellers worldwide, including Amazon, Kobo, Google Play, Book Depository, and more. All net proceeds go towards keeping the Pixel Project's campaigns, programs, and initiatives, such as this one, alive and kicking. So to find out more about violence against women, you can go to, and what you can do about it, visit the Pixel Project's website at www.thepixelproject.net. And with that, we've come to the end of today's session. Once again, thank you so much, Daniel, for joining us. And thank you to everyone for tuning in. So have a good day or good night, wherever you are in the world.